to introduce you the next panel, which is a discussion called Investing in Business-to-Business Startups. To moderate this panel, I'll ask to join me here on stage Mr. Vitaly Golomb, Silicon Valley-based serial entrepreneur. I love this, by the way. Keynote speaker and acclaimed designer. Welcome.
Thank you.
You can sit wherever you want.
Tap, tap.
Then I'll ask to join us Mr. Imran Akram, who just made some questions and was well introduced by Lopu. Please sit down. Mr. Marc Rougier and Mr. Chris Chrysanthou. Welcome. Well, I'm sorry, I just have to get this said in order not to be just like signaled like this once more. You have 20 minutes for the panel discussion and then 5 minutes for Q&A. If you want to have the Q&A meanwhile, I can sort of facilitate that. Yeah, sure.
All right, can you hear me? Is my mic on? Yeah? Great, well, what a beautiful place. Can we have a round of applause for the organizers? This is amazing. So very happy to be here, a little bit jet-lagged. Flew in last night from San Francisco, and boy, are my arms tired. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. First, I'd like everybody to introduce themselves and their funds. I'll go as an example. Just joined HP, the Silicon Valley's original startup that was closed the first round of financing in 1939 with $538. Now we're a Fortune 19 company, I think, officially. And I lead investments for HP Inc.'s corporate venture arm, and we're focused on 3D printing, IoT, immersive, and robotics. So absolutely nothing that we're going to talk about this morning. So gentlemen, what I'd like you to do, first of all, is introduce yourself, your funds, when you close this latest fund. I know you just joined. What your average check size is, and your last and maybe favorite investment. So maybe, Chris, you can start.
Sure. Morning. Chris Chrysanthou. I'm with Notion Capital, a London-based B2B, very applicable to our conversation, focused fund. We're primarily a Series A, but we also do a late seed kind of investment. So average check sizes, about $750K for seed, about $3 to $4 million for A. And we invest across the board in anything B2B, especially subscription-based businesses. We closed Fund 3 middle towards late of last year, and we're doing a second close anytime in the next few weeks at $140 million. So we've got a lot of dry powder to deploy still. And my favorite deal recently, well, the most recent one I worked on was Go Cardless, which kind of broke all our rules. It was a Series C investment in London in the fintech API-driven economy company.
Great. Mark?
Good morning. Do you hear me? So I work with Elia Partner. I'm a general partner at Elia, but prior to that, I was an entrepreneur. And I am just slightly biased toward B2B because I co-founded 4 startups, and I failed one. That was the one I wanted to try in B2C. So I'm a little bit biased. And Elia Partner is a VC firm based in Paris that is focused on early stage, so perhaps a bit earlier than you. We do pre-seed, seed, and Series A, but we want to be the first professional investor in venture. And we focus on hardcore technology, IoT, deep learning, math, big data, and these sort of things, with a strong preference for B2B model. The seed investment we make will be around 500 to 1 million, and we can grow. We work along the entrepreneur as far as we can. And we love it when they become too big for us, and then we have other VCs coming alongside. We are raising a new fund, the number 4 generation in the company, that will be 120 million, and we have 44 companies in the portfolio so far. Some might be known from here, like Criteo, that went NASDAQ for 3 billion. We were the first investor in Criteo. My favorite investment recently was Shift Technology, that you might have heard of, because it's a typical of what we love to do. That were 2 mathematicians that were working in a bank in London, and they came up with these algorithms to predict funny things doing deep learning, non-assisted deep learning that's very trendy and quite sophisticated. And they decided, instead of working for the bank, to move back to Paris and create their company. We seeded the company based on the people, based on the algorithms, and based on the expectation in terms of market size. And it was about insurance, predicting fraud in insurance. And they successfully, in 1.5 years, capture a very big account, both in subscription model, SaaS-based. And it was quite difficult because they say to the bank, if you want me to work on your data, you need to give me the data to the insurance. And we thought that's very, very bold to ask an insurance to give you the data. And they made it, just these two guys, because they knew math that the insurance guy didn't know. And they just recently closed a Series B with a US-based venture, tier one VCs, and that's what we love, when we can find early stage company with strong IP and bring them to the stage where they can go global with a US-based VC.
Great. Imran?
Yeah, hi, Imran Akram with Access Strategic Ventures. So the fund we have two funds actually within it. There's an early stage and seed stage fund doing investments up to 2 million. And then I joined 2 months ago for the growth fund, where we look at investments from 2 to 15 million. And in everything relevant to insurance and asset management. So that's everything enterprise technology, everything fintech, and everything in the big insurance verticals of auto, property, travel, and health. And in terms of B2B, like I've invested in a bunch of companies serving businesses, and particularly small businesses. So obviously Treatwell, where we just had Lopo on stage, but also Quandu doing something similar in restaurants. And probably another one that's actually been a good ride is a company called Auto One, which is serving used car dealers. So I guess if anything, my personal focus has been on serving businesses that consumers hate.
Great. All right, so on my panels, I only have one rule. You cannot agree with the person that went right before you, right? Because there's nothing more boring than saying, I agree with everything he just said. So my first question to you is, what makes B2B specifically interesting for you as an investor? So whoever wants to go first on that.
I can start if you like. So Notion is DNA, effectively, is B2B. The founders of Notion are 4 entrepreneurs that built and sold 3 startups over the course of 15 years for an exit value of $1 billion. And having that kind of repeatability in B2B, especially the last one, which was a $700 million exit, one of the first pure SaaS plays in Europe, is very rare in our ecosystem, especially as investors. So what we decided at the time when the guys sold the company was they saw these early trends of B2B and cloud and SaaS as business models emerging. So we decided to build a focus on that expertise. And all of the companies that we have 36 portfolio companies nowadays. All of them are B2B, primarily subscription-based, 99% of them subscription-based businesses. So building that repeatability in benchmarks from seed to Series B and onward to understand metrics, how you go from one gate to the next one, how the companies evolve, builds a lot of expertise in our network. We have a lot of partners around us that help our portfolio companies. So it creates a lot more robust business value for us to give to our companies, in effect. So it helped us in our positioning, it helped us in our expertise, our companies as well.
It's just easier, I think, isn't it? Like if you think about the stage, right? The consumer side of things would be us sitting on the stage, right? The stuff you can see in the lights. But then all the money was spent on the stuff like under the stage, right? Getting the wiring and the plumbing and electricity, all the wires around the room. And I think about B2B like that, right? Actually, it's all the grubby stuff underneath where all the real money is moving. And then the other big difference is businesses, on average, are rational about the way they buy stuff. If you take like the other extreme of gaming, I have no idea what a consumer is going to like. The only way to really test it is you put it in front of them and you find out. Whereas with business, if you can go and a dozen businesses picked one thing, you can be reasonably sure there's going to be at least another dozen businesses who are going to think about it the same way, and it gets much more predictable.
Now, on the other hand, you can argue that consumer businesses, when they get big, they get a lot bigger than B2B businesses, right? Think of all the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, binary, right?
But I totally disagree with what has been
Excellent.
said.
That's what I want to hear.
Except pretty much everything I say, but still. No, one thing as an entrepreneur is that I believe, first of all, you need to do what you love and what you are good at, irrespective of numbers and the sort of theoretical thinking around that. And I have seen a lot of entrepreneurs, they start, for example, a company, they don't know if they will go B2B or B2C. And the first thing they do, they will go B2C for the wrong reason. The reason is that in B2C, it's easier to capture users. any sort of mildly successful B2C startup will easily capture organically 10,000, 20,000 users, and you believe it's success until you think about monetizing. And then you cannot monetize. There are like basically 3 ways to monetize in B2C. You can go premium, having people paying for your service, or you can go media, selling ads, or you can go marketplace of some sort, or selling somebody else's stuff. But then you need millions of users to actually make that work. So we see people going B2C because it's easier to capture usage, but then they will all turn to B2B because it's easier to actually monetize. Or the other way around, I've seen people going B2B because they say, that's where the money is.
There's money early on. Yeah.
Exactly. So as an entrepreneur, you need to go where you are good at. You need to do what you love to do. There is no rules that are purely based on money. Otherwise, you will just fail. As a VC, I have one more thing, which is the ratio of success. And I totally agree. To build a brand, you need to go B2C. The big brands that we all know about, the Instagram and WhatsApp and whatnot that went into the internet recently are all B2C. But for one Instagram and one WhatsApp, you have hundreds of thousands of them you've never heard of and will never heard of. And the winner takes all.
If you set aside WhatsApp, the other guys will make their money out of the businesses, right?
Right.
Like Google, Facebook, Instagram, their business is mining consumers and selling their valuable info to advertisers.
Right. But to mine consumer, you need tens of millions of consumers. Why? To make money as a B2B company, you need a handful of good paying, recurring, and that's where the knowledge
depends, but I think the other thing that's blurring a lot lately, and we're focusing a lot, is this consumer-facing aspect of B2B. So a lot of the companies that we deal with at the B2B level, especially SMB or mobile-driven businesses, there's a B2B2C or B2C2B component to it. So forget about the old world where you build a clunky old product that someone was buying in a procurement kind of phase. Nowadays, there's a consumer that has to look at it and interact with it. So building a beautiful product doesn't apply only to B2C, it applies to B2B. So it's a different world. So I think the lines between B2B and B2C are blurring. So a lot of the businesses we invest in are B2B phase, but the guy that pays is
So would you distinguish between SMB then and enterprise? Would that be the line then?
No, we do both. And I think both of them have beautiful product. Like for us, one of the most important things that we look at, and one of the guys on our team is a product guy, because it has to look good as a product. If it doesn't look good as a product and the end user doesn't enjoy interacting with it, forget about it. It's not going to succeed long term. So.
I make a distinction in B2B between what can be self-served. You have customer, SMB customer going to your site. They discover you via SEO or SEM or whatever, and then they try, and then they give the credit card, and then they pay, and you never get to see them. And you can capture hundreds, thousands of SMB's customers that you've never seen. The model there is close to B2C in terms of executing. It's about generating demand, it's about converting, and you will check the same KPIs that you would check on B2C. And then there is the other model for bigger account when you need to meet face-to-face. And demand generation for this second aspect and selling for this second aspect requires a different set of skills. So actually SaaS, which is self-served, is very different from going direct.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
See, and this is a recurring...
You cannot say, absolutely. You
absolutely disagree.
This is a recurring topic that comes up, like in lots of things. When you go speak to big enterprises and you ask people, or sorry, like enterprise technology companies, and ask them, why are you not selling things directly off the website? I think 99 times out of 100, it's because they built a product that is not good enough, right? If it's not simple enough that someone can come, hit the website, understand what it is, and use it, then it's probably not simple enough, right? And I think, and so in that sense, I think there is a distinction between smaller businesses, meaning one where the guy who pays is the guy who's actually going to be, in the system using it.
Right.
By the time you get to a large enterprise procurement, where there's a procurement team and a technology team, and dozens of people who need to justify their existence as to why it's complex to configure, they like having a complex product on the other side. But I think lots of those are just getting washed away.
Yeah, but then you have companies like Salesforce that stick around. So speaking of which, question comes up, especially in smaller countries, for entrepreneurs, do they build a product for customers locally first? Do they go globally? Do they go to the US first? What are your thoughts around regions and what you would recommend to your entrepreneurs?
I have again a bias here because based on an experience. I don't know about Portugal. I don't know how good the startup scene is. Obviously, it's good, but from a market standpoint, I don't know. What I believe is that we need to go as far as we can in terms of MVP in the local market because it's cheaper And because you have so many barriers to go before you can capture a customer, get the admin barrier and the language barrier and the cultural barrier as low as you can to make sure you have an MVP. An MVP meaning you have actual value, you deliver value, and your customer understands the value. Once you have reached that, it's time to think about scaling up, which is a different phase in the startup life. And scaling up might means to go abroad. And in the digital era, to go abroad quite often means to go to the US. So what we see happening, and I think it's a pretty decent model, is to use your domestic market to prove the value of what you do and to prove that you can capture a customer. But then when you have to scale up, perhaps you need to defocus or refocus somewhere else. And I think it's nearly impossible to be successful by doing both at the same level. You don't go to the US by saying, oh, it's one market. Like, I start my startup in Lisbon, and then when it's time to scale up, I will go France, UK, and the US. That, I think, doesn't work as a startup. When it's time to go to the US, you have to consider the US as your #1 focus. And you may have an R&D base and some early customers that prove the value in your local market, but it's very difficult to capture both at the same time as a startup.
That's where the question that you had before in terms of SMB and enterprise might come into play. So if it's an SMB play, I absolutely believe global day one. We've invested in 2-3 companies outside the UK that started with SMB focus. The R&D team is still in that small country where it's much cheaper to run. You build a great brand locally and all the engineers and everyone wants to work for you. But at the same time, you face purely a global base and you sell online. You build an inside sales team, especially Portugal is perfect for this, many languages spoken. You can set it up here and run it from here. If it's an enterprise play, on the other hand, you do have to prove a little bit your ability to sell, and sometimes it's somewhat easier if you have a market. If you don't have a market locally, then forget about it. But if you have a market locally that you can try and sell an enterprise deal there, then it becomes somewhat of an imperative. And the investors, the international investors, are sometimes going to ask you, are you able to sell? Prove to me that you can sell it, and then you can hire a team.
And what are the chances that you happen to, like, it's unlikely you were born in the biggest market for whatever you're doing, right? So I don't know, I think the other way. Like, you look at it and say, okay, what am I doing? And if you do, I don't know, healthcare, selling into pharma companies, then you need to be going and selling where those guys are, right? So, and obviously, like, you know, restaurants, health and beauty spas, whatever, they're everywhere. So you could start local. But I think there's lots of businesses who end up in a trap. They get very good at selling into their local market, and they build like a completely local sales team, and they've customized everything for the local market. And then we come along and we're like, well, how is this going to sell anywhere else? And so I'm more the other way. I'd say, like, as quickly as possible, like, get into more markets. As soon as you know, like, a basic thing works, go sell it everywhere else, right? And I think, you know, one in the geography thing, like, I always think Israeli companies do this well, right? Like, any Israeli company, by the time they're at like 20 people, it's impossible to tell where they're from, right? And they're selling in the US, and any American, and you should, everyone should do this, yeah. So they've got a tiny domestic market, like, doesn't make sense to be there. The biggest market for most things is the US, and anyone who picks up the phone hears an American accent on the other end of the phone. They see American voices in the video on the thing. And I think
they're just a little bit more direct than Americans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, I did agree on that very strongly. And I totally agree with the Israeli model. That applies, by the way, to the Nordic countries as well.
Yeah, because they're tiny.
But I disagree with the accent, because if you go to the Silicon Valley, any company there has a foreign accent.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I think 60% of the founders are foreigners.
Well, customer service is usually not in Silicon Valley. It's usually in the middle of the country.
Exactly.
So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but what is your kind of erogenous zone as an investment? What is your G-spot when somebody tells you? And do you think that, as an investor, do you believe in this myth that you can provide a value add, or do you think the best entrepreneurs are going to be able to do it with or without your help?
You called it a myth, Vitaly. I can't believe that. No, I think, but it comes back to the same thing, right? So if you're, you know, by the time you've founded 3 B2B startups and, you know, invested in dozens others, like, you start seeing certain patterns, right? And there's certain people, you know, who are going to be helpful to each of the other ones. So I think that's absolutely the case, that you can help the businesses, and someone looking for money should be trying to find someone who gets what they do. Right? Someone has to spend time explaining, like, here's what I do, here's why this works, then that's probably the wrong investor. And then for me, the place where I like getting into businesses is when, for sure, the unit economics are working, right? Like, you know, you make more money out of every incremental transaction, which is not always the case. And then also that there's a clear model for acquiring new customers and that the payback on that is understood.
Very good.
I'm the opposite.
Excellent.
Give me a crazy person with a crazy idea, and I'm all for it. I don't need numbers sometimes. No, I agree that for the most part, it should be an entrepreneur that knows and has done it. But at the end of the day, we're in a lot of ecosystems in Europe that are first-time entrepreneurs and first-time ecosystems. So very, very rare to find that. And the other unfortunate thing we have sometimes in continental Europe and even the UK, entrepreneurs go to the US, especially on the B2B side, because they'll end up in the US anyway, make the company successful and never come back to do it again. So we don't have a lot of repeat entrepreneurs, which is unfortunate. So with those first-time entrepreneurs, sometimes they do need a little bit more support. So as a fund, we believe in that, and we've set up a function and capabilities for them. If they want it, it's up to them to utilize some of that support and grow. But it's not forced. The ideal ones don't need it. So.
Mark, so you just recently went to the dark side,
Right.
as it were, as did I. So what's your perspective still from entrepreneur side?
My sweet spot, which I rather call sweet spot instead of G-spot, if you don't mind, in terms of investing, is a crazy sort of PhD person who met a business person, and they together fall in love with a use case. And I can go super early if the team makes sense, if the IP is strong, and if I do believe in the use case as well. So that's really what we love to do. In terms of being useful, I think I worked with roughly 30 VCs when I was on the other side. In various companies, the one I founded and the one I moved to as a BA or advisor. And I've seen three categories of VC. The number one category is the totally useless VC. Oh, not useless, they bring money, but that's what they bring. Sorry, not useless. And that's the majority of them. But then there is another category, which is the worst VC, the VC who believes they can do the job instead of the entrepreneur and want to push to, you should do this and you should hire this guy. And by the way, send me your Excel spreadsheet by the end of the month when KPI don't make sense when you arrive early. And that actually destroys value. And I do believe that VCs can exist and working alongside the entrepreneur and sharing expertise. And the most thing we have to share is that a VC has seen tens or dozens of other companies, and they can do their sort of deep learning, big data analysis based on their experience and give that back to the entrepreneur. And if you get along with the entrepreneur and the VC, that actually does create value.
Very good. Well, I think we're trying to catch up on time, and we're out of time. Or do we have some time for minutes?
We're going to cut on your coffee break.
We're going to cut the coffee break.
No, we're not going to cut them, cut it. We're just going to cut on the time. It was supposed to be 40 minutes. Now you have to be back by noon. But before, if anyone wants to make some questions, okay, their arms raising.
Questions, comments, concerns, and rebuttals.
Is the coffee break really off?
My name is Andrea Febbraio. I'm from TIDS, which, by the way, is Elia company, yes. So I have a question for you, just because I'm biased, because all my life has been in AdTech, which I know now sounds a bit of a dirty word because it's not so exciting, seems recently. But because you are guys that invest in B2B, I would like to have your call on the AdTech, if you are planning or if you have in pipeline new deals in the AdTech space. For the ones that doesn't know, AdTech means advertising online and technology.
So what are your thoughts on ad tech? Has Facebook completely eaten ad tech or not completely yet?
So, very short one because we work together. So TIDS, we love you guys. I know. And we did Criteo and then we did TIDS. And so we do believe in that space. It has changed. And you need to go a bit deeper in the math to actually create marginal value in that space. So it becomes a bit more difficult. But we keep looking at it because of the big data and deep learning things that can bring new value out of ad tech. So we still believe in ad tech.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be differentiated. Unfortunately, we see a lot of Me Too kind of plays, and I believe a lot in both the data and the mobile component of it. I think the growth is still on the mobile side, so if we start seeing more differentiated things, we will. We've done a lot of investments in ad tech in the past, less so now because we're not seeing any differentiated things, not because we wouldn't do it. But.
Yeah. Most of it goes back to that first category of VC, right? There's like, people in advertising are good at selling. So there's lots of businesses, like agencies essentially, who come up, do a great pitch about why they're differentiated and have raised a lot of money for what is essentially just an agency. There is no technology. So the fact that all those have now washed out of the market is completely fine, right? And actually the people who are doing something interesting. So yeah, still looking for those.
And I can give you a perspective from the US. just to disagree with everybody. In the US, you can say in the last 12 to 18 months, Facebook has eaten, I don't know, something like 80, 90% of the ad tech market. Kind of absorbed it, because people, if they can get all the traffic they need from one source, why would they bother with 10 different ad networks? So it's a tough space to really displace them now. And they're going to keep growing stronger and start eating Google a little bit. Yeah. And they have.
Next question. Does anybody have
Do we have another
one?
question? If not, I have another question. Right, really pandering to our audience.
There's one arm raising over there. A neighbor
I'll save it.
arm.
I'll save it.
So I had more of a general question. I read somewhere that the amount of investment that is made on seed startups in the US is around $54 billion per year, or about $1 billion per week. And that in the and then in Europe, it would be maybe 10% of that or 20% of that. So do you think that there is a chance of the European market, of the European startups catching up to where the Americans are, or is Europe just delaying the inevitable and everything's going to go over there?
Seed sounds high. That sounds high for US.
Yeah, it's way too high of a number.
There's a difference, right? You certainly, and fundamentally it's down to fund size, right? So that there's bigger funds in the US. If you're a fund with $1 billion, then a seed punt for you could very easily be $10, $20 million. You really don't care if you lose a few of those, right? Whereas if you've got a fund of 150 million, then that threshold is $1 million or two. So I think that maturity of that industry means you can take much bigger bets much earlier, and some of those will turn out to be huge, valuable things like Facebook, Google, and so on. Some of them will turn out to be complete holes in the ground. But I think actually in Europe there is a bunch of other good funds, more people who've done it more time. So I think you can certainly build big businesses here, and frankly lots of those funds are also looking over here now.
And the average, I was actually reading a report on the plane last night, that the average seed in Europe is actually increasing and slowly catching up to the US in terms of size of the round. The absolute number of seed deals is still bigger in the US overall, but Europe is catching up in many ways. Look, I would never compare Europe with US or any country in Europe with any other country in Europe for that matter. Each ecosystem is in a different maturity level and each ecosystem is completely different. So stop comparing anything with anything. Focus on building something strong in your local ecosystem and forget about comparisons. There's good companies coming out of everywhere.
My last startup was in San Francisco, and I actually decided to move to Europe because I do believe that Europe is catching up on seed, and I believe we need more seed money, but it's not the most critical thing. I think in terms of investment, the most critical thing comes later, like exit strategy. We don't have tech IPOs, nearly no tech IPOs in Europe.
Or in the US nowadays.
Well, to be fair, there's only been 2 tech IPOs this year in the US too.
That's it.
Right, but at least investors can expect to have big scale-ups and then exit. And that's really what needs to happen next in Europe. I think the seed situation is not that bad. And I think, yes, we can catch up and we can fight. And besides, with 1 million in Lisbon, you do much more than with 1 million in San Francisco.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I guess I'll have to let you go to the coffee break and make those questions there. And we will be, it's downstairs, and there's a lot of other stuff going on, and people are complaining because we're all here and we're not going there. So you can as well explore a little bit. And we will be back by noon, which is midday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.